So Netflix has dropped a whole bunch of foreign horror recently, and I've been trying to watch as many of them as I can because I always like to keep up on these things, even though a lot of you don't even care and typically don't even click on these when I watch these Indonesians or Thai horror films that Netflix randomly drops. So I watched Possession, Kerasukan, and with that title, I was like, oh, Possession, like the Sam Neill movie, that classic weird horror film from the 80s. And I wasn't thinking anything of that. I was just like, oh, it's a title like that, right? And so I threw it on, and this is from Indonesia, and it was on for maybe like 10 minutes, and I was thinking, wow, this actually feels a lot like the Possession movie with Sam Neill, the framework of it anyway. And so then I looked it up, and this is in fact a remake of that movie, which they just announced recently that Robert Pattinson, wasn't it, is supposed to be remaking Possession. I swear that I saw that. And so it was very random that this movie from Indonesia is a remake of that film. So, yeah, I mean, it does have the same framework, but otherwise, it is just a very generic, erotic Indonesian horror film. So it does try to lean into the eroticism. Now, it does not really try to recreate the iconic freak out scene with the girl, which I kept expecting to happen. I thought, of all the things that you're going to remake, that seems like the most obvious thing to redo. They do have a girl like out in the street, kind of having a minor freak out for like literally a second or two. But if you've seen the subway freak out scene where the girl's like throwing herself around, and that is one of the craziest performances I've ever seen in my life, if not the craziest performance within like that time frame. That shit was wild, and definitely something that sticks with you forever. So I was definitely waiting for that, but it never came, which was pretty surprising to me. Now, this one, as I said, it has a similar framework with like a guy who's gets out of the military, comes home to his wife. His wife is acting different. They have a kid together, and she's like leaving, and he's following her, and he's trying to figure out what she's doing. So there's definitely similar framework type beats to the movie, but then most of it just kind of becomes a pretty generic classic Indonesian horror film, with some eroticism, which is not super typical for the Indonesian horror films that I watch. But even though it is kind of erotic, I don't know what the limitations of Indonesian cinema are, or like what's considered taboo, right? Because like if you watch Indian cinema, like you're never gonna see a boob, right? Like that's just something that's like super taboo. And I feel like I don't know if that's the same here. I feel like I have seen nudity in Indonesian horror, but it's definitely on the rarer side. But with this, as like erotic as this film tries to be at times, it is so tame in that regard, because there is nothing like actually explicitly shown, but there's like a lot of like masturbation or like moaning, and like sex with a demon or something along those lines, and it's but there's nothing really to it to make it feel warranted. um it doesn't feel like they commit to it. It feels very tame. And then there is this like weird demon type character that likes to float around upside down and has this like weird CGI face. And it is kind of unsettling, but it doesn't look great either. So like in moments it does feel kind of unsettling, but other times when you see it, the CGI is so noticeable, and it does kind of take you out of the film. So it breaks away from any tension that it might create in other moments. And the first film is the original film is a pretty confusing watch for sure. So I'm not going to fault this film for not really making a ton of sense, although I'd say this movie tries to make it a little clearer on what's going on, because this girl's like this playwright or screenplay writer or something, and this guy wants her to write something. But we definitely do not get a lot of similar scenes with, like, when she goes over to the apartment, or like when he goes over to the apartment and there's this like weird growing thing in the house or in the apartment or whatever. It's been a little while since I watched the original, but I remember a lot of different scenes. There is the girl who's coming over, who's like worked with the girl and is kind of trying to have a romantic thing with the husband, so some of that's retained. So there is, as I said, there is similar things going on here. But if you're going to watch either, just watch the original. I don't think that this does anything. This definitely doesn't do anything better. And for people who are like big fans of the original, I think they'll be super disappointed and be like, why does this exist? And with the reaction to what I remember being that Robert Pattinson announcement uh, with that remake, it doesn't seem like anyone wants a remake to happen at all anyway. So I don't think that anyone is interested in this even existing. So yeah, I think this is going to be a huge skip for almost anybody, especially since most people don't even want to check out Indonesian horror, and they especially don't want to watch Indonesian remakes of English language films. So I don't know. It was an interesting watch for sure. There was some moments that were fairly entertaining, if not just for being kind of silly and funny to me. But seeing it as a remake, not knowing that going in, was an interesting realization as it was on. I don't know what Kerasukan means, so I probably should have looked that up. But regardless, it is on Netflix if you are interested at all. Overall, it was okay. It was okay. Like, if I had never seen Possession before and I watched this, I'd probably feel similarly to it as I do. I don't hold Possession in some high regard like a lot of people do. It's a very bizarre film that I really didn't understand all that much at all, to be completely honest, and I wasn't super high on. So this isn't like, you know, something that I'm being prideful because I find it to be offensive that they even tried to remake such a classic. And, you know, I don't, it's not something sacred to me. So that's not where I'm coming at it from. I'm just coming at it like I always do. I try to be as honest and open and as fair as possible with any film, regardless of my attachment to prior source material or adaptations or whatever. For me, this is just, it's not all that interesting, but it's probably somewhere like kind of in the middle of most Indonesian films I watched. It was okay. It was okay. But as a remake, I think a lot of people would be like, this is not good at all. So, um, yeah. And I didn't find myself invested or interested all that much in the characters. I thought the husband, much like in the first film, is just a jealous idiot that, like, you know, if your wife doesn't want to be with you, just move on. Just move on. Like this, I don't know, watching people think that their partners are their property has never really been something that's all that um I don't connect with that. It's not something that I feel some kind of attachment to or like an understanding of. It's like, if somebody doesn't want to be with me, I'm just gone. I just don't have any interest in being with them. So I do try to put myself in the shoes of the people and take myself away from, you know, who I am, and be like, okay, I understand that, but they don't become likable people to me. It's like, oh God, like, stop. But regardless, overall, you know, I've said my piece on it, and we'll see if anyone checks it out and lets me know what they thought of this in comparison to the original. All right, I'll see you in the comments. Adios.